They say pride can buy a first-class ticket, but it can't buy character. On Flight 417 bound for Los Angeles, the cabin buzzed with the usual mix of chatter and impatience. A businessman in an expensive Navy suit adjusted his gold watch, sighing loudly as passengers shuffled past. Then, a teenage boy, maybe 16 or 17, stopped at his row, holding a boarding pass. "Excuse me, sir," the boy said politely. "I think that's my seat." The man glanced up briefly, his expression souring. His eyes flicked over the boy's hoodie, worn sneakers, and the frayed strap of his backpack. "This seat's taken," he muttered dismissively. The boy blinked, confused but calm. "It says 14B on my ticket." The man smirked, leaning back in his leather seat. "Maybe check again. I doubt you're supposed to be in this section. This isn't basic economy." A few nearby passengers stifled smirks. One even shook his head with quiet amusement. The boy, composed, patient, simply nodded, stepping back without argument. He didn't glare. He didn't raise his voice. He just adjusted his backpack and waited, because while the man saw just a kid who didn't look like he belonged, what he didn't see was the quiet confidence behind those calm eyes. That kid was Jordan Ellis, the son of Richard Ellis, the CEO and principal owner of the very airline they were sitting on. And before the plane landed, the man in 14B would learn that sometimes the seat you think you own belongs to someone who owns the entire sky. Jordan Ellis had always believed that to lead an airline, you had to understand what it felt like to fly with everyone else. The families, the tired workers, the nervous travelers. His father, Richard Ellis, had built his empire from one leased aircraft and a borrowed dream. And he'd taught his son, never get so high up that you forget what it feels like to sit in the middle seat. So while the Ellis family could afford private jets and VIP lounges, Jordan preferred the back of the boarding line, blending in with ordinary passengers. That day, on Flight 417 to Los Angeles, he wore his favorite gray hoodie jeans and a pair of scuff sneakers. To most people, he looked like any other teenager heading home for the weekend. As passengers shuffled down the aisle, Jordan reached row 17, his assigned seat, 17A, only to find a well-dressed businessman already sitting there. The man had a sleek leather briefcase beside him, his gold cufflinks glinting under the cabin lights. He scrolled on his phone, barely acknowledging Jordan. "Excuse me, sir," Jordan said with polite confidence. "I think that's my seat." The man looked up slowly, then down again, his lips curling. "I doubt it." Jordan held out his boarding pass. 17A window seat. The man gave a small laugh, the kind that carried both arrogance and disbelief. "Look, kid, I paid for the seat. Why don't you go find one in the back? I'm sure someone can swap." A few passengers turned, curious. The flight attendant, a young woman named Dana, approached, sensing tension. "Is there an issue here?" she asked gently. The man gestured dismissively at Jordan. "This young man's confused. He's not supposed to be in this section." Dana took both boarding passes, glanced between them, and froze. Her voice tightened. "Actually, sir, he's right. 17A is assigned to him." The man's eyebrows twitched. For a moment, he hesitated, weighing pride against embarrassment, before grumbling, "Fine, enjoy the view." He stood, making sure everyone saw his annoyance, and dropped heavily into the aisle seat. As Jordan settled in, the man muttered, just loud enough to hear, "Probably some charity case. Airline's really losing its standards." The word stung, but Jordan didn't flinch. He turned to the window, watching the sunlight glance off the wing. There was no anger in his eyes, only calm, quiet composure, because Jordan had learned something his father always said. Respect doesn't show itself in how you speak to powerful, but in how you treat the people you think aren't. The flight took off smoothly, but the air inside was thick with tension. The businessman beside Jordan, now cramped in the aisle seat he'd tried to keep, shifted irritably, muttering every few minutes about the decline of flying these days. Jordan quietly put in his earbuds, scrolling through an aviation report his father had shared with him. He wasn't there just to travel. He was observing, taking notes. Every flight was a classroom. An hour in, turbulence hit. The plane jolted violently, causing cups to tip and passengers to gasp. A baby cried. The flight attendant scrambled to steady the beverage cart as coffee sloshed over the rim. Jordan instinctively reached to help the woman across the aisle whose drink had spilled. But before he could, the businessman sneered. Figures. Ever since they started letting anyone into these flights, everything's gone downhill. No standards, no class. Jordan turned to look at him, not angry, just quietly disappointed. Maybe standards start with how we treat each other, he said evenly. The man scoffed, crossing his arms. You wouldn't understand. Some of us actually earned our seats. The words hung in the air, drawing side glances from passengers nearby. A flight attendant walking past hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly when she heard the exchange. She recognized Jordan 30 minutes from landing. The captain's calm voice filled the cabin speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We hope you enjoyed your flight today. Before we begin our descent into Los Angeles, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge someone special on board. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Mr. Jordan Ellis, son of our CEO, Richard Ellis, who's traveling with us today to experience our in-flight service firsthand. The cabin fell completely silent. Heads turned. Whispering rippled through the rows like a wave. The businessman froze. The color drained from his face. Slowly, painfully, he turned toward Jordan, the same boy he had dismissed, mocked, and refused to make room for. Sitting quietly, the corners of his mouth lifting in a small, knowing smile. Enjoying the flight? Jordan asked softly, not out of arrogance, but grace. The man stammered, I didn't realize. Jordan nodded gently. Most people don't. Around them, passengers exchanged looks of disbelief and a few quiet smiles of poetic justice. The wheels screeched against the runway, and the plane rolled gently toward the gate. The businessman beside Jordan hadn't said a word since the captain's announcement. His arrogance had drained into silence, replaced by a pale, uneasy guilt. As passengers began to unbuckle, whispers filled the cabin. That's him, one woman murmured. The CEO's son, another whispered. He was sitting back there the whole time? Jordan stayed calm, helping the elderly woman across the aisle with her bag, offering a polite smile as if nothing unusual had happened. His composure made the moment even more powerful, a quiet grace that demanded respect without ever asking for it. When the seatbelt sign turned off, the cockpit door opened and the captain himself walked down the aisle. He stopped right beside Jordan, standing tall with genuine respect in his eyes. Mr. Ellis, he said warmly, thank you for flying with us today. I hope everything met your expectations. Jordan stood, slinging his small backpack over one shoulder. His expression was kind but thoughtful. Almost everything, he replied. The businessman swallowed hard, his hands fidgeting with the buckle on his briefcase. His voice cracked. I didn't know who you were, he said, staring at the floor. Jordan turned slightly toward him. His tone was calm, steady, but firm. That's the point, sir, he said. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect. The man's eyes glistened with shame. Please, he whispered, don't report me. I could lose my job. Jordan gave a small, understanding nod. Don't worry. I'm not here to punish people, he said softly. I'm here to remind them that respect doesn't need a reason. As he walked toward the exit, the entire cabin seemed to part for him, not out of fear, but quiet admiration. The captain extended a hand. Your father will be proud, he said sincerely. Jordan smiled faintly. He always says the same thing. The real flight test isn't in the air. It's how we treat people on the ground. The businessman watched him go, his reflection trembling in the polished overhead bin. And in that moment, he realized the true cost of arrogance. A few days after flight, an email began circulating quietly among the airline's employees, from executives to gate agents. It wasn't the usual corporate memo full of jargon and formality. This one carried weight, simplicity, and truth. The subject line read, all passengers are equal. Inside, the message continued. Service and respect are not determined by appearance, class, or color. Every passenger deserves dignity from the moment they step on board to the moment they land. At the bottom of the email was a handwritten signature, Richard Ellis, CEO. The message had been written after a private conversation between Richard and his son, Jordan. The father had listened quietly as Jordan described what happened on Flight 417, not with anger, but disappointment. By the time they finished speaking, the policy was already in motion. Within a week, that email became a company-wide training mandate. Videos, workshops, and new service guidelines were implemented across every branch. Flight 417 was never mentioned by name, but everyone in the company knew the story. Meanwhile, the man from seat 17A found himself trending on social media after another passenger's video surfaced, showing his dismissive behavior early in the flight. Facing public scrutiny, he posted a long message online. "I judge someone based on what I saw, not who they were. That flight taught me more about humility than any deal I've ever closed." The post went viral, not for the scandal, but for the lesson. Thousands of comments poured in, passengers sharing their own experiences, crew members promising to do better, parents telling their kids about the boy who stayed calm when others didn't. Jordan never responded publicly. He didn't post. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't need to. His silence, his composure, and the way he handled that flight had already echoed far louder than any statement ever could. And in quiet offices, busy airports, and crowded terminals across the country, employees began to treat passengers just a little differently. Not because of a rule, but because of a reminder. He thought he was denying a seat to someone who didn't belong. A teenager in sneakers, a hoodie, and quiet confidence. But what he didn't realize was that fate had reserved that moment for him. A first-class ticket to humility. Because the truth is, life has a way of boarding us next to our lessons. Sometimes they wear suits and carry briefcases. Sometimes they wear hoodies and carry grace. When that man refused to make room, he wasn't just denying a seat. He was denying the opportunity to see beyond appearances, beyond assumptions, beyond his own pride. But destiny doesn't miss a flight. By the time he landed, he had learned that true class isn't printed on a boarding pass or stitched into a label. It's reflected in the way we treat others, no matter where they're sitting. He had paid for comfort, but left with wisdom. Because the greatest upgrades in life don't happen in first class. They happen in the heart.